Hello, glad to see you on my channel. I really value it. And today I want to share with you a wonderful story. It's a dramatic story that will come as a total shock to everybody. It is a really amazing story. So enjoy watching it. Do not worry. Everyone has difficulties, smiled the young fellow, holding out a plump envelope. Instead of condolences, you could have reduced the percentage, the surgeon answered dryly, taking the envelope. Everyone earns as he can. And I'm sorry, I take the risk too. If anyone but my father noticed that such a sum of money has passed through the bank, questions will inevitably arise, the guy replied without an ounce of regret in his voice. Take it, don't hesitate. Don't think it's anything criminal. It's pure money. It'll all go through in the best possible way. Just no red tape or unnecessary bureaucracy. It's the same as taking out a regular loan. Just a higher interest rate for urgency. Collectors won't come. Then I'll set the door on fire, crooked chuckled surgeon. Victor cackled his eyes. Have you watched television? No one is going to threaten or intimidate you. You're not going to default on your payments, are you? The doctor only nodded glumly, clutching the envelope in his hands. I wanted to throw the wretched papers right in the face of the insolent. But the circumstances. We work honestly. In addition, we meet you without fraud. I had to distract my father from important matters and ask for you. Just return the money to the bank on time, and a percentage will go for mediation and, if necessary, to pay for contingencies. What kind of contingencies, Max? Victor asked again. He was unnaturally poor to the point that he was almost in harmony with his robe. The man had long ago stopped smiling, did not communicate with colleagues and neighbors. So old friends hardly recognized in this ghost of a once vivacious and full of life man. Don't ask unnecessary questions. Why should you fill your head? Max brushed him off. You are getting help. You asked for help yourself. And the rest is taken care of by my father and his bank, and a little bit of me. After all, if you don't want it, you can turn it down then too. All right, no pressure. I know what's going to happen. If it wasn't for the circumstances, I never would mess with you. That even sounds insulting. Max curved his lips. The urge to throw an envelope at him only increased. But Victor held on, putting the money in his pocket. After all, there really was no choice. Now the man was willing to do almost anything just to get the right amount. Never in his life had he depended so heavily on the mercy of another man. Money was needed like air. After all, his beloved wife was ill, and so much so that neither his personal skills nor his extensive acquaintances in medical circles helped. For the first time, not in a hopeless situation, the surgeon was at once resigned. He would have to pay a lot. But where to get the cash? Especially so urgently. Time was literally in the days. So to spend it, not only to earn money, even a trivial loan was too wasteful, without certificates and all sorts of approvals. The necessary amount could be obtained only in fully lawful offices' quick loans, which began to steep the rapid interest after the first month. It was too dangerous to enter into this bondage, and they would not approve such a huge amount. Victor was on the brink of despair. He worked like hell, did not refuse extra shifts, and even began to go on night duty as a trauma surgeon. Chief physician was sympathetic to such combinations, approving the double or even triple rate. That's just kopecks from working in a regular city clinic, still barely enough. And then another bill came from a fee clinic where my wife underwent procedures. Additional medicine, expensive, imported, was needed. Victor did not know what to do. When Max appeared on the horizon in an expensive suit, in a nice car, he smelled of brand-name toilet water. And even the hair of the young prolifer looked more expensive than the whole life of the poor surgeon. The guy happened to be in a poor children's health clinic by pure chance. He was vacationing in a nearby restaurant and accidentally drove a fishbone into the Desna. The restaurant administration immediately referred him to the nearest trauma center. An exhausted Victor, an experienced surgeon, coped with the mishap in a couple of minutes, gently treating the wound. And even without pain instead of a puncture, teeth, comparable in price to a work of art, as well as other parts of the precious body, were unharmed, and Max left a generous tip in joy. "Isn't it enough?" the banker's son grinned, looking at the wistful way Victor looked at a few bills. "That's fine. Thank you. I wouldn't have taken it before. It's just that there's a lot of trouble right now. Tell me what happened." "Yes, as a matter of fact, who would have thought?" Embarrassed Victor began. The man was not used to sharing his experiences, but felt that the rich guy could somehow help. He decided to tell everything frankly. Max listened attentively, nodded at the right places, and even inserted a few sympathetic remarks. His whole appearance expressed unspeakable sorrow. But inside, he could barely contain himself from everything. But in the life of a surgeon turned out to be a real platitude. Cheap groceries, miserable life, finished off his second-hand wife, rewarded with a severe illness, heavy but curable in general. And for a certain amount of money, just the amount of the family was not enough. And the money was ridiculous. But even these pennies. They say the doctor could barely scrape it together. Such inability to take care of himself was despicable. And Max had already regretted asking about the experiences of the insignificant man. How had he suddenly realized that he could use him to his own advantage? Lately, even his father's bottomless pockets had begun to empty. More precisely, his patience ran out. The endless debauches in nightclubs, merry parties, spending fabulous sums in restaurants drove my father into a real frenzy. The solvent banker finally decided to begin to educate his offspring and shut off the golden stream. And it could still be endured if not for the huge card debt earned in one of these headlines. Max's lawyer has always helped him get out of any trouble dry. The young prolifer was always running scams, getting money literally out of thin air. But now, time was running out. A lover of easy life who had never worked a day, honestly, and did not intend to trouble himself with the cares of mortals. Max liked only easy and fast money. And if it were not for the card debt to former convict Frank, better known by the nickname Luke, he would not be so worried now. "Don't feel bad. Victor, I think I know how to help you," Max smiled politely. "Well, have you got it?" Luke spoke softly, looking at the young goofball. He couldn't help shivering under the strain of such dangerous attention. Max kept his composure but was clearly nervous. Unlike that night at the underground poker club, which had turned out to be a big loss for the son of a banker. This time their meeting took place in a small restaurant on the outskirts of town, which Luca owned. Released from prison, the former gangster decided to quit the criminal past, building a small but profitable business. Finally, Max pulled himself together and looked the ex-con straight in the eyes, gray, expressing nothing. Luca was the same age as his father, and had just as extensive connections, and was far more dangerous than a middle-class banker. It was better not to joke with such people, and certainly not to disappoint them when you owed a large sum. This was the first time the boy had ever been in such a difficult situation. A frantic father had blocked most of the cards at the bank. The money was only given as a loan, and the promotion of another business scheme required time which Luca was clearly not going to give. Not exactly. But there was a proposal. Max squeezed his napkin nervously. His interlocutor raised his eyebrows slightly, and it was probably the first emotion he showed during the whole dialogue. He twirled the table knife in his fingers defiantly, catching the mirror-polished blade of Max's reflection. "A surgeon owes me a large sum of money. I can sell you that debt. He is a reliable man. Will you tell him it's from me and get it all at once with interest?" Luke touched the blade of his knife, checking the sharpness of the sharpening. Apparently the cutlery did not satisfy the man, and he put it aside. "Shall I sell it?" Quietly but firmly spoke the former convict. "It's just that, you see, I borrowed money from my father's bank, and I have to pay it back. The surgeon promised to pay a percentage. So there's enough to pay my debt to you too. And to close the loan account, everybody's on the plus side. Boy, you don't seem to know who you're talking to, do you?" Lucas said, looking out the window. He leaned back in his chair lazily and started to fumble with his right hand in the inside pocket of his jacket. Max wanted to continue his speech, but froze when he saw the barrel of a gun pointed in his direction. Your father, a respected man in this town. That's the only reason you're still breathing. Write down the surgeon's address and get out. Max gulped nervously as he stared into the black channel of the gun barrel. With a trembling hand, he fumbled for a napkin, somehow found a gold pen in his pocket, and then scribbled Victor's address in uneven lines. Get out, Luca muttered. Max immediately got up from the table, hurried to the exit, crossed the small parking lot, started the new BMW, and raced down the highway. Only 20 minutes later, when he was literally on the other side of town, he was able to stop, violently slamming his fists on the steering wheel, whispering, "Fucking convict, motherfucker. How am I supposed to close the loan now?" A well-thought out plan had gone down the drain. The guy expected not just to give, but to resell Victor's debt in order to transfer the proceeds to the bank. However, the crazy convict decided to simply divorce him and take it all for himself. And now how to close the loan itself. Getting rid of the debt, Max hangs himself with the obligations to the bank. In fact, he never got out of the hole he had driven himself into. At least the bailiffs won't be pointing a gun in his face. The property was in my father's name anyway. The guy grumbled, staring angrily through the windshield. We did what we could, said the head of the department of the clinic where the surgeon's wife lay. The bed in her room was already empty. Her belongings were folded in a private clinic bag. All clean, neat, not as they're free. Too bad that vegetable wrap didn't help. In the end, Caroline couldn't take it. She died right under a lot of ives. The inexpensive medications and simple procedures didn't work. Private doctors assured that the woman was on the mend. And then the respite came to an end and the beloved wife burned out in a couple of days. We have a small firm of funeral services at the clinic. Can we ask them to give you a discount? The head of the department said, putting his hand on the man's shoulder. Even the comforting gesture was imbued with a note of mercantilism. The whole thing made me feel sick. I want to leave the place as soon as possible. Don't. I'll do it myself, muttered Victor in response. He picked up the bag, threw away the business card and the brochure of Ritual Agency, and then went home. It was stuffy in the crowded bus, but the car had to be sold so Caroline could win a few more weeks. How ridiculous. She was very young after all, only 33. She always had a cheerful outlook, dreamed of going on a trip, planned a vacation for next year. Victor leaned against the glass and squinted. Prague, tears not coming in. Gloomy thoughts cradled in his head. Everything around him seemed too irritating. To continue to exist in this world without her was simply unbearable. In my pocket, my phone suddenly began to vibrate. The cheapest buttons. Just so I didn't completely lose contact with the outside world. Victor, hello, it's Diana. Heard in the tube voice of a neighbor. Catherine asks, when are you coming back? Still cannot calm down. She wants to know how her mother is. Yes, Diane. Sorry for the delay. Can you put her on the phone? The surgeon shook himself, trying to give his voice some emotion. Daddy, a concerned squeak from the Sunshine Lady came over the phone. Don't worry, I'm on my way. I'll be home soon and we'll go for a walk with you. How's Mom? Still the same? Worriedly, the little girl asked. Everything is going well on the mend. Don't worry, we will see each other soon. I want us all to be together like before. Soon, my daughter. Soon. Pass the tube to Diane. Victor squeezed his eyes even harder, blurring a single tear with his fist. The passengers sitting next to him began to squint quietly at the man. Someone else's misfortune always draws the attention of the curious. It's like a movie on television. Yes, Victor heard his neighbor's voice again. Diane? Don't you have a phone number for a funeral home? There was a silence. The woman on the other side of the line seemed to be sobbing so as not to frighten the child. I was already hoping it wouldn't come in handy. She whispered softly. I'll text you in a minute. I'll text you now. Thank you. Victor hung up the phone. Pain and resentment tormented him from inside like a blunt knife, tearing apart not only his body, but also his soul. Why was the world so unfair? Why did so many good people die? He and Caroline were happy. And 5 years ago, they were finally able to have a beautiful daughter. Catherine. The little girl was just a baby, and how to tell her about her mother's death, Victor had no idea. Perhaps now his daughter was the only ray of light, supporting the surgeon in this world. He just had no right to break down, to leave her alone to the mercy of fate. The little girl would certainly not survive the loss of both parents. The girl's fate would depend entirely on her father's grief. Carolina would not want that. Therefore, there was no way to let down the memory of his beloved wife. A few weeks passed. Victor buried his wife quietly without a wake. Seeing the faces of his relatives filled with tears and pity was beyond him. Perhaps I'll let them know later, the man thought, looking at the neat grave. His daughter was not yet aware of it either. The only thing he managed to come up with was that his mother needed treatment abroad, so she would have to live there for a while. The man with a trembling hand bought some postcards and mailed them on Caroline's behalf. The lies couldn't last forever, but Victor felt the need for a breather before he could tell the little girl the truth. "Good afternoon," a quiet voice was heard. The surgeon turned around, noticing a man in a gray suit nearby. The clothes were simple in appearance, but obviously not cheap. Most importantly, the stranger's gaze lived through him, and even from afar he smelled menacing. "Is there any kindness that is not spent at a fresh grave?" Victor uttered, leaning on the bedrock. "It happens. Believe me, I've seen it." The stranger shook his head. "What can I do for you?" The doctor didn't like him right away. There was something dismissive about him, as if the strange interlocutor disliked the very fact of talking to Victor, although he did not ask for a conversation. "Can I help you?" "Yeah, I don't think so. My name is Frank, but it doesn't really matter. What is important is that I don't have time to hang around here with you." Victor interrupted. "Your debt, Max sold to me. So don't take the money to the bank, but to the address I'll tell you." Immediately looked sterner, and the remnants of politeness flew from him like the last leaves off a dead tree. They were several meters apart, but the surgeon felt uncomfortable even from here. "Sold. How did we have an arrangement? It's simple. Don't mess with idiots. You messed with them and got yourself in trouble. Although if you return everything on time, maybe you won't get hurt," Luca said. "But what about it? I have a daughter," and the man turned around helplessly at the picture grave. A smiling Caroline was looking at him. "I know about that and about the daughter. But debt is debt," Luca hummed. "I wouldn't advise you to be late with your payments, because I know your address too, of course." The hint was more than clear. The bastard major had turned out to be a real pig, dragging a stranger into his dirty games. If only to know in advance how it would all end, would he have messed with this Max. Victor bit his lip. His legs were shaky, but he grasped the bed and managed to keep his balance. He looked at his companion, hardly restraining himself from spitting under his feet. The sight of the doctor disgusted him terribly. And what a coincidence, this one turned out to be a surgeon too. The vilest of breeds. A few years ago, Luca's father had also been in the hospital. A convict was behind bars at the time, but even from there he managed to get his only loved one into a good clinic. He helped as much as he could with money, talked to his comrades to look after the old man, but the father did not make it to see his son. Died on the operating table, and the doctors just threw up their hands. Money, of course, no one returned. That's why Victor's story didn't touch him one bit. Luca carefully studied his personal file, which had been collected for him by old acquaintances, and only grinned. There is justice in the world. Still, this useless butcher has to feel for himself. How does it feel to lose family members? That's why the ex-con decided to visit the debtor in person to express his contempt. Even though some might say it was too prejudicial, I don't care. The White Hat tribe is all the same. It's just that one of them paid the price. That's all. When should the amount be paid back? Victor asked deafeningly. I give it a week. Where do you want it? Luca hummed, took a business card out of his inside pocket, and stuck it between the bars of the bedpost around someone else's grave. Even coming within arm's length of the doctor disgusted him. Zeke still spat, grimaced, and went to the car, which was waiting for him at the entrance to the cemetery. Victor followed him with a glance, feeling the hatred bubbling up inside. A few minutes of interaction were enough to understand that this man must be bid farewell as soon as possible. Waiting for Luca to leave the grounds, the man walked over to the business card and, without looking, slipped it into his pocket. By the end of the week, what else could he sell to collect the full amount in such a short time? Even assuming he mortgaged the apartment, no realtor would make the property in 7 days. Victor headed for the bus stop. He didn't want to jostle in the overcrowded transport, but not with such debts to pay in a cab. As luck would have it, the bus he needed did not come up. I had to take another one, taking 3 changes to get home. The parking lot outside was surprisingly empty at that hour. Only a few cars caught my eye, one of which was so expensive it couldn't possibly belong to any of the neighbors. Budget neighborhood backwater. Even a loan for such a representative car was beyond the means of the locals. As he approached the driveway, the man noticed that the light in his kitchen was on. Strange, daughter must be at Diane's. Maybe a neighbor came by for something. She had a duplicate key to their apartment long ago. Although wouldn't the fussy woman have called before entering someone else's house? Diana was too polite, and even though she was practically a member of the family by now, she always asked permission. With some misgivings, Victor began to go up to his floor, swearing once again to the elevator and the management company, which was not able to carry out basic repairs. The man touched the door handle with his cold, singing fingers on the way up, feeling how much his palms were sweating. The old hinges creaked in search of the master in the silence of the hallway. Her gaze immediately stumbled over the muddy footprints leading into the kitchen. Clearly not Diana's, whoever the uninvited guest was. Didn't even bother to take off his shoes. Victor froze on the threshold, not knowing what to do. Heroes of the film always rushed forward with determination, but accustomed to solve everything with a peaceful word. The doctor just did not know how to behave in such situations. He did not go into the unknown with a tire iron. After all, he had taken an oath as a doctor and promised not to harm people. Come on in. I'm getting bored of sitting here alone. An unfamiliar voice was heard. Victor exhaled deeply and then headed resolutely into the kitchen. At the table sat a tall, imposing man. His temples were already decorated with noble gray hair. At first glance, he looked about 60 years old. A noble profile, refined features. The unsolicited guest smoked a cigar, the ashes on the tablecloth. Caroline was fond of the tablecloth. It had been inherited from her grandmother. At the sight of the colorful cloth, her heart ached with longing. Who are you? Victor asked in a colorless voice. Alexander, father of the fool who sued you for money that did not belong to him, replied the visitor. Victor frowned as he continued to consider the guest. So there he is, the notorious father banker with whom everything was negotiated. Max said you knew. Victor threw in dryly. The boy overplayed his hand and will be punished. He had no authority to dispose of anything other than his own cash. Believe me, he'll remember this lesson for a long time. There's just a few minor formalities to sort out. I hope you haven't had time to spend the full amount yet, he continued. The surgeon sighed heavily, taking a seat in his chair. This is the second offer to pay the debt in 1 day. I don't even know who to run to first. Should I go broke? He said. The landlord sighed again, and then told him what he had borrowed the money for, about the loss of his wife and Luca's subsequent visit. I'll give it back. I'll give the whole amount, Victor snapped. Give me at least a day to breathe easy. Just save Caroline. And you only care about the money, said Victor, looking at the banker sympathetically. The banker carefully smothered his cigar and brushed the ashes off the tablecloth into his handkerchief. Honestly, I thought you were a card player, just like my dipshit. Wanted to give you a little scare to get your money back. But I see it's a different case, Alexander said, leaning back in his chair and beginning to wander his gaze around the room. Do you know how much trouble I've had with Max? He asked. I have no idea who he took after in character. Gave him the best of everything since he was a kid. Teachers, private schools, and all to no avail. Grew up talentless, wasting his life. My father scolded me. When I started to be a freak, Victor began. Maybe I should have too. Alexander suddenly froze, staring at a photograph attached with a magnet to the refrigerator. It showed Caroline and Catherine strolling down the park's alley. The shot came out remarkably well. The surgeon proudly hung it in the most prominent place. I still couldn't hide the picture. Who's that? The banker suddenly asked in a trembling voice. My late wife. Victor answered. Damn, it looks just like that. The banker took out his phone and began fidgeting with his finger on the screen. Do you happen to know this woman? He asked, showing a picture. A young woman in an elegant dress who looked like Caroline, like 2 drops of water. That's my wife's mother. I've seen her in their family album. I wish I could have met her in person, Alexander said. She can't have one, said Victor. Memories flashed before his eyes. Alice, that was the name of the woman who had once turned his head. A fleeting romance. She wasn't married yet. Their passion was vivid. And then Alice disappeared and the budding Alexander just couldn't find her. The banker took a close look at Caroline's facial features, squinting his eyes, assessing her hair color and age. Everything matched. Her heart was pounding for the first time in years. Not in the least bit excited, I thought. Standing next to her mother was a little girl who had also inherited her features. Your daughter? Alexander asked excitedly. Catherine. She's only 5. Victor nodded. Frankly, the little girl also got a lot more traits from her mother than from her own father. The same noble profile, the characteristic structure of the nose. Victor continued. Could it be the granddaughter? The banker thought dumbfounded as he looked at the pictures. I don't know what you're up to, but there's nothing to think about. I'll deal with my son, and then we'll talk, Alexander said. What? But the banker didn't answer. He stood up in silence and headed for the exit with a quick step, looking ahead with a thoughtful look. Victor wanted to see the strange guest off, but only waved his hand. We've got to get the sums together soon, before these creditors move on to more serious measures than courtesy visits. I hope you're kidding, Max muttered angrily, looking at his father. Be thankful I didn't take you away with a belt, Alexander replied, throwing his son a cold look. And what am I supposed to do in this hole? The hole is in your head, and this is a nice village, far from the city with nice neighbors. A friend of mine from the army, now retired, bought a house there, so you'll live in the countryside, get some fresh air. You'll almost obey him, like me. No alcohol, no cards, and certainly no powders. Keep your head down, otherwise you'll be kicked out of the house without a penny in your pocket, he explained to me. You're not my son. You never were. Mother was a bitch, and the offspring took after her. I knew nothing good would come out of the stepson, but I hoped to raise him. Too bad it didn't work out. You have no rights by blood. One word from me, and you'll lose everything. What are you so mad about? Max cried out helplessly. The reminder of the fact that he was not related to him burned with a long-standing resentment. Alexander stood up from the table, looming menacingly over his son. You were behind my back building fraud with the bank money, dragged a stranger with a young child in his arms. And if only there was a good reason. I'm no saint either. But you're an idiot kid. You just lost at poker and decided to get off easy. Max squirmed in his chair, trying to pull away from his father, but he put his hands on the windowsill, leaving him no room to maneuver. The banker's eyes blazed with cold rage, the consequences of which the son knew firsthand. The desire to argue was gone. Now I'd get off with a banishment to the village, and not with something worse. I will pay the debt in the bank out of your pocket, Alexander said. When you come back, will you start working like everyone else, living on your salary? Max turned pale, but did not dare to interrupt. He swallowed his objection and tried even to breathe. He rarely saw his father so angry. Go away, I don't want to see you, said Alexander angrily, letting his son goodbye doubts, deciding not to put things off for long. He got ready, called his personal driver, and went again to see the surgeon. At the same time, he should reassure the man by telling him that his debt had been paid. The poor man had suffered enough. He didn't need any more trouble. Having climbed to the now familiar floor, Alexander rang the doorbell. It was opened. Far from immediately, the banker had to press the button a few more times, listening to the trill. Finally, the lock clicked, and Catherine's weeping face appeared in the doorway. What happened? Alexander asked immediately. And who are you? The girl stepped in, looking sternly at her guest. A friend of your father's. I've come to visit you before. You seem to be sitting at your neighbor's house. Aunt Diane is working today, and Daddy went somewhere and didn't come back. The girl's lips quivered, large tears crawled down her cheeks. The little girl was not in the least bit upset. The banker's heart squeezed painfully. The sight of the crying baby could not leave the man indifferent. Let me call him while you calm down and invite me to visit. Alexander smiled. Daddy said not to let strangers in, the girl whispered. Let's get acquainted then. My name is Uncle Alexander. Your name is Catherine, the girl stretched out. There, now I'm not a stranger. Besides, a friend of your daddy, so will you invite me in? The little girl just nodded her head and opened the doors. The banker went inside, picked up the girl in his arms and pressed her to him. Unhappy Catherine immediately picked up the man as if she felt her own blood. Well, nothing. Now we will find your daddy. Do not cry, Alexander softly muttered, stroking the girl's hair. That evening, the banker did not leave the little girl's side until she fell asleep. Only after that, the man first called the police and then began to look for the missing surgeon through their own channels. Alexander knew many people and had an extensive circle of connections, but even his influence was not enough to find Victor. He seemed to have vanished into thin air, not appearing at home either in the evening or in the morning. Even the clinic couldn't tell where he might have gone. Doctor didn't leave a message or a statement about leaving, just vanished without a trace. Unable to leave Catherine alone, the banker took her to his apartment to take care of the girl until her father arrived. In the apartment, he left a note with an address and phone number, but Victor never showed up, even several weeks later. All this time, Alexander took care of the new inhabitant of their huge house. The little guest brought a pleasant bustle and life that hadn't been seen in the mansion for a long time. The only pity was that the little girl was still sad. She cried often and was not at all happy about her new toys or the most varied entertainment. I miss my parents. Alexander never gave up looking for her father for a day. But all was in vain. The man had already begun to suspect bad things, less and less believing in the success of his search. At some point, Alexander wondered, what if Victor is never found? There was no way to give the girl to an orphanage. Home baby just cannot survive such a change of scenery, and he became more and more attached to her every day, considering her his own granddaughter. Something had to be done about custody. It's okay, the banker smiled as he walked into the girl's room with another toy in his hands. She looked at him with sad eyes and only nodded. Catherine didn't talk much and slept restlessly, but overall she seemed to be beginning to slowly come around. They haven't found Daddy, she spoke in a quiet, hopeful voice. We'll find him. We surely will. The girl turned away, pressing her palms to her face. Alexander sighed heavily, acutely aware of his helplessness. He had to take care of the little girl at any cost. His gaze fell on the hairbrush, which had been bought especially for Catherine. The man went to one table and picked up a few hairs. That should be enough for a DNA test. And if they turned out to be related, it wouldn't take long to get custody. Money solves everything in this world. What is it? The banker muttered impatiently. The test took longer than he expected, so Alexander decided to go to the lab in person. The specialist's answer was unequivocal. You're related, the lab technician nodded, examining the forms. Not direct grandfather and granddaughter, but the blood is the same. So thank you. Alexander thanked the lab technician emotionally, shaking his hand firmly. He left an envelope full of cash in exchange for the results forms and went home happily. The question of Catherine's father was still unresolved. But at least the weight of his daughters hadn't fallen off his shoulders. Already sitting in the car, the banker suddenly realized how impossible this coincidence was. That's how to meet his granddaughter, learn about the fate of his beloved and her daughter. Apparently, the disease was hereditary, since it had taken the lives of both women. Alexander felt his hands tremble. Had they really been around all this time, so close and never once met? Damn if I'd known in advance. The realization that he had failed to save not only his lover, but his daughter as well, was driving him mad. At least Catherine would now be in his care, and, God willing, Victor would be found. A few more weeks passed, and life gradually began to get better. The little girl was perfectly safe. The banker never let her out of his sight, surrounding her with real care. The rich man finally found a place to apply all the drunken care, which at one time neglected the willful Max. Except that so miraculously acquired granddaughter continued to pine for her father. Alexander, as promised, continued his search. His trusted men turned the entire city upside down, checked train stations, hospitals, and morgues. All real potential places where he could show up. But the elusive doctor vanished into thin air as if he had never existed. If you know something, say it. I'll think about getting you back now, the banker said dryly into the receiver. Am I really going to have to buy my freedom? Max answered defiantly. It's not a bargain. I'm just deciding if you're useful enough to let you into town. Though you can stay in the village till you're old. No one will mind, came the angry message from the speaker. Obviously, the young upstart wanted to answer something, but even over the phone, he didn't risk going too far. Okay, there's something. His debt to the bank. Anyway, I lost it to Luca and figured that would cover it. Apparently, the doctor didn't get the amount together in time. Solved the problem in his own style. Don't tell me that's the onion I'm thinking of, Alexander said threateningly quietly. If you know other crime lords with that last name. It might not be him, Max retorted melancholy. Hey, you puppy. And all this time you kept quiet. How was I supposed to know that someone needed this surgeon? You don't call to ask me how I'm doing. And by the way, but Alexander did not even listen to the whining of the offspring. He dropped the call, then immediately dialed a new number. Only now the old conversation in which Victor had mentioned the transfer of the debt began to come to mind. But that evening Alexander had listened to, absent-mindedly, and then the picture of his daughter took all his attention. The banker informed the police of his men of the new circumstances. However, Luca was not considered an authority figure for nothing. Even though the former convict had retired from business, it was not easy to scare him. He refused to answer police questions at all. And at a personal meeting, he simply said he knew nothing about the surgeon's disappearance. But think about it. Why would I kill a chicken that was supposed to lay a golden egg? Not with money, not with an apartment, not with an apartment. So I would have worked it off. A smart doctor is always needed, but just to kidnap or kill. What would I get out of it this way? Alexander looked intently at his interlocutor, but Frank calmly endured his gaze. The logic is certainly there, the banker agreed. I don't think I've ever let you down yet. The one time, and that was enough to last me a lifetime. Luca squinted angrily, clenching his fists involuntarily. The hint of an old friendship stirred unpleasant memories. The banker hadn't always been an honest businessman. Once upon a time in the 90s, he and Luca had tried to create a business together. Only one was on the side of honest deals. and the other ran a dirty business as part of a criminal gang. Their friendship only lasted a few years. Their outlook on life was too different, but even then they often crossed paths on business matters. After all, in such a small town, it is difficult for two predators to fit together, especially when they are trying to share not only business. Once Alexander even tried to get rid of an old comrade when he tried to raid one of his factories. Then Luca was one step away from jail time, but the banker withdrew his application in time. Why? Of course, the story couldn't do without a femme fatale. Caroline's mother, the surgeon's wife, asked Alexander to intervene. Both men were in love with her, so Alice felt guilty about causing a rift between the mates. This was only partly true. And then the woman fell ill and disappeared from the horizon. Neither Luke nor Alexander could find her. And now they blamed each other for not being able to save the only joy in life. So this little girl is Alice's granddaughter, muttered the ex-con. Yes, Caroline was her daughter. Which one of us shut up? By now, the banker was regretting his decision to tell Frank the whole truth. It was just a matter of opinion. And then the accumulated worries seemed to burst forth. The old pal settled down at the Rosliv Hotel for a glass of aromatic cognac. By now, though, anything could have been splashed in there. The alcohol was coming in like water, falling through without any taste whatsoever. We need to find a guy, you know. Katerina will completely wither away without him. Alexander said, muffled. I'm telling you it's not me, Luca shouted. I believe you. I'm just asking for help. My guys can't manage on their own. They can't get access to everything. Maybe through your channels? We'll look into it, the ex-con nodded. At least show me your granddaughter. Maybe he could at least have a family in his old age. He couldn't find any kids. I've seen my own birth. You'll scare the kid, won't you? The banker grimaced. But not all of them can be as cold as you. And so their life went on. The banker allowed his former friend to see Ekaterina, who gradually began to get used to her new grandfather. As strange as it might sound, there really were no problems with the custody arrangement. A positive DNA test, a substantial sum, and the right connection solved everything. Luca tried to challenge Alexander's rights to a second test by an independent laboratory. He was defeated by Catherine, the heir to the empire. But this in no way affected the ex-con's affection for the girl. A glorious child. It was simply impossible not to love her. And of course, everyone kept looking for Victor. The best private detectives, along with Frank's assistants from the criminal world, had combed the city up and down, but found not even a trace of the unfortunate surgeon. The hope of finding him was fading with each passing day. But in memory of his daughter, the banker kept trying, regardless of the means. And then a year passed imperceptibly. So, young lady, what is the name of this tree? Asked the governess, pointing to the trunk in the center of the park. Maple, shouted Catherine, joyfully picking up shaped leaves. Good girl. And this? Chestnut? Well done. The girl was dressed in a beautiful dress and carefully collected herbaria under the watchful eye of the teacher. Alexander did not skimp on raising his granddaughter, for her from the best specialists every day. The girl was occupied with developing families, games, and school lessons to distract her from her sad thoughts. Over time, this helped. The little girl began to smile more and more. She was much more willing to make contact with people. Although still sad for her lost parents, she stayed with Alexander, whose mansion could accommodate not only another girl, but an entire school. "Oh, Daddy," the girl muttered, believing in the bouquet of leaves. That the governess holding her hand only grimaced as she saw the unsightly homeless man rummaging through the trash. A man with long hair and thick stubble was going through the trash looking for glass bottles, completely oblivious to passers-by. "Come quickly, young lady." "No use," said the governess. "Papa!" Catherine shouted even louder, beginning to tear herself from the tutor's arms. "That's my daddy." The girl finally pulled her palm out of the tutor's grasp, ran up to the tramp, and put her arms around his legs. The man flinched, fearfully wrapping his arms around the sack. He seemed frightened of such attention to his person, accustomed to the groomed inhabitants of the park trying to avoid him. "Let the child go at once, or I'll call the police," the governess hissed, glaring angrily at the bum. "I'm not holding. I'm sorry. I'll go." "No police." The homeless man tried to wave him off, but the girl clung to him tightly, not wanting to let go. "Daddy, Daddy," Catherine kept repeating, tucked into her dirty jacket. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and when the governess tried to pull the girl away, she cried even harder. "What on earth is this?" the governess said perplexedly, after receiving another kick from the little girl. "I'm sorry. Just don't hit me," the homeless man replied, uncomprehendingly, timidly clutching the bag of bottles to himself. "Who are you?" the woman asked, sternly examining the vagrant through the glass of her glasses. "I don't remember," the poor man grimaced, rubbing the scar on his head. "I don't remember anything." "You'll have to come with us unless you want me to call the police," the governess said, pulling out her phone. The story of the girl's missing father had become a true legend, and every employee in Alexander's house had heard of it at least once. The woman pointed the camera lens at the homeless man's face to take a picture of him, and then sent the picture to her boss. Within a couple of minutes, an expensive car pulled up right across the park. Two sturdy guys picked up the not so frightened and homeless man under his arms and put him in the back seat. "Stop!" "It's my dad," shouted Catherine. But the car had already rushed off into the distance. "Daddy, Daddy, don't go away." The girl seemed to be getting hysterical. The governess gently picked up the little girl, reached the exit, and put him in the second car, already waiting for them. "Hush, hush, it's all right. Let's change the dress now. Play something," she tried to soothe the baby. "Yeah, I don't want to. Bring Daddy back." "It's okay. This man just looks like him." "Catherine, calm down, please." "No, it's Daddy." Feeling her heart bleed. The poor child didn't deserve to suffer like this at such a young age. Good thing at least the rich grandfather didn't give up his granddaughter. She has so much care and love. "Victor, no," the banker interjected, seeing the tramp on the threshold of his office. "What are you addressing me for?" The homeless man mouthed frightenedly. The sack of bottles was taken from him at the entrance. The two guys continued to hold him under his arms, watching his every move sensitively. The poor guy was nervous as hell. After all, for his kind, such visits did not end well. But that one burst into the office of Luca, to whom Alexander had also forwarded a photograph. "That's him. Looks a lot like him. Only the fucking scars weren't there before," the banker muttered thoughtfully. "Victor, where did you disappear to? What happened?" Luca asked, coming up close to the tramp. "Why do you call me by that name?" Unable to stand it, the man shook his head. "I mean you, Victor. Is that your name?" "I don't remember," Alexander muttered. "What the hell?" casting everyone present with a perplexed look. The poor man in rags stared at them, uncomprehending. From time to time he wrinkled his nose, rubbing the scar, as if it were giving itself an occasional pain. What's the last thing you remember?" Onion asked, looking at him. The hobo squinted, looking somewhere in the distance, and bit his lower lip. "Came to myself in the street in some junkyard, head covered in blood, no hide on me, no money. Hands tied up with duct tape, started screaming. Thanks to the local guys, they didn't kill him. They came out, didn't let us get lost. They're homeless too, but they got heart, taught me how to survive. On the street. They helped me to make it." With each word, his eyebrows rose higher and higher, but the ex-con just shook his head frowningly. The homeless man continued to tell the story of his adventures, gradually more and more beginning to resemble his old self. When the consternation and awkwardness finally disappeared, the men became convinced that this was the girl's father, dirty, overgrown, but exactly the surgeon they had been looking for all year. "I live with the girl now. We're poor people, kindred spirits. One has lost his memory. The other isn't having much luck either. What kind of girl? The banker interrogated. In his mind, he was already used to considering himself a father, and the news of her replacement was unpleasant. His heart prickled. Angela, a former orphanage girl. She took me in when there was nowhere else to go. Poor girl with a tragic history fell in love with a guy, but he turned out to be unclean, constantly turning tricks. All wanted to build a business on his machinations. He got mixed up with the wrong people, or rather ditched them, and made her his accomplice. Victor stepped from foot to foot. It was obvious he wasn't comfortable telling someone else's personal story. Come on. Maybe we can help her, Luca encouraged him. There's nothing you can do there anymore. To get his sentence reduced, this guy told the police she was his partner. He had a stash in Angela's apartment, which she got from the state as an orphan. That's what they found as evidence, though she had nothing to do with it. The surgeon was silent. I gained, looking out the window. He was not indifferent to other people's misfortunes. With each word, he grew darker, as if he could not understand such a heinous act. Luca sank into an armchair with his arms folded across his chest. The banker went to the table, too, and poured himself a glass of cognac. And then what? Alexander asked. Next, already in prison, it turned out that Angela was pregnant by this crook. She in no way wanted to notice his meanness and hoped to build a normal family, so that the child would be raised by parents she did not have. She had to give birth right there, and the baby was immediately sent to the baby home. When Angela was released from prison, the state had already taken over the child's apartment. Of course, nothing was given to her. A tramp with no money where to bring her up. She tried to find a job, but no one wants to take her. Her time in prison was behind her. Anyway, that's how vagrancy became. And then she met me together somehow easier. She even seemed happier. At least she smiles sometimes. The story really turned out to be tragic. Yes, and Victor's own adventures this year touched the soul. In the end, they looked at each other. The men decided to stop torturing him with inquiries. The father was found. He suggested he stay in the house, clean himself up, and take a little break. Victor began to resist. He did not feel comfortable leaving Angela for long. An unfamiliar rich people, frankly, frightened by their sudden generosity. But the banker, who had decided to play along with the man who had lost his memory, offered him a job. Now, a little settling in, and you can take Angela to your place. You will be in the guest house. You'll help me with the chores. Why don't you hire normal workers? Asked the surgeon suspiciously. But you won't have to pay. Normal workers always have their own interests. And you would not cheat, knowing that you risk a roof over his head. Victor thought about it. The offer really sounded tempting. After all, winter was soon to arrive. A dangerous time for the homeless. Now he and Angela lived in a small box made of thin plywood. Good. Only we should be able to go out of the precinct. Deal, Luca grinned. I'm watching. The banker breathed a sigh of relief. Now all that was left was to somehow recover the lost memories. Victor began to settle in a new place. He cut his hair, shaved his stubble, sticking out in all directions. Would wear a white coat, and not at all distinguishable from the once familiar surgeon. True, the man was strong from the get. Go, but across his forehead now stretched an awful scar. Alexander began to assign him a simple job, and in the meantime he himself began to select specialists who could clarify the past of the girl's father. He was not allowed to see Catherine yet, believing that now he would only frighten the girl, and he himself would feel uncomfortable. By the way, the little girl, as if sensing that everything was getting better, calmed down and became obedient. Not capricious, only 6 years old. But Catherine was already smart beyond her years. Maybe she even knew something about what was going on. But no one could say for sure. The banker bypassed all the clinics, gathered the best specialists, who began to draw up a treatment plan. He immediately offered Victor this opportunity. He hesitated for a while, but finally agreed, fearing to lose the favor of a rich patron. "So now I'll put you in a hypnotic trance," the doctor said, looking Victor in the eyes. "Do you think it will work?" The man asked with some doubt. "Of course, I've been treating such disorders for years. I think I do not succumb to these tricks," he answered confidently. Once Victor felt the heavier against his will, and the monotonous voice of the doctor began to sink him into oblivion. Alexander was next to him the whole time, watching the procedure through the glass from a nearby office. He hired the best specialists, who worked tirelessly on the return of memory, literally piece by piece, trying to reassemble the old personality of the surgeon. And now, at last, the hard work had borne fruit. The doctors assured him it was the best time for a hypnotherapy session. "Tell me, what's your name?" the doctor pronounced, addressing the patient. "I don't remember," replied the surgeon in a trance. "Look inside yourself, relax. The answer is always in there somewhere. So what's your name?" Victor, the banker, exhaled a sigh of relief. It seems that all these procedures were not in vain. "That's great. Victor, tell us what happened to you a year ago." The surgeon grimaced painfully. His hand twitched to rub the scar, but his muscles were too relaxed without his hypothetical sleep. "Max met me in the driveway, wanted to apologize, then sat me down in the car. He was very nervous. I did not like his behavior. I wanted to get out, but he pressed some rag to my face. I came to my senses at the junkyard, and he pulled a tire iron out of the trunk. Then he hit me, and then..." Alexander clenched his fists, feeling the anger boiling up inside. Everything at last fell into place. The surgeon was not missing at all. He had been kidnapped by his wayward son, just to keep his debt-selling scam from getting out. He even got some chlorine somewhere. The kid's a fool. The stupidest thing Max ever did. After all, he was too late. The truth about the scam had already come out by then, but the spoiled major still decided to clean up loose ends, and even attacked himself without intermediaries. Good thing the brat didn't calculate his strength. Then he got scared of the blood and didn't finish the victim off. The hit took away Victor's memory, and then the caring residents of the junkyard helped him get back on his feet. It's a shame about you. Your only son turned out to be such an asshole. You were no angel yourself when you were young. But the apple fell too far from the tree. Luca came up and said, "It is not my apple," sighed the banker. The stepson took the family together with his wife. Thought I'd make a man of it. What's the matter now? Don't blame yourself. Permissiveness often turns out to be, but who gave him this permissiveness? Alexander sighed. All right, he gave his daughter back her father. He redeemed her. Help him to remember himself completely. No, redemption is still a long way off. But it's a start. After a successful hypnosis session, Victor gradually began to remember his life. A few days later, he asked to see Catherine and apologize to his daughter for her disappearance for a long time. The girl said nothing, only hugged her father, resting against his shoulder. Victor did not want retribution, only to be reunited with his family. But Alexander had a different opinion. The surgeon didn't need to know the whole truth. The banker, without asking anyone, handed over all the materials to the appropriate authorities, not only about the assassination attempt, but also about other machinations of the young swindler. Soon Max stood trial, sincerely believing that his father treated him unfairly. After some time, Victor and his daughter moved into their own apartment. Despite the entreaties of Alexander, the surgeon did not want to depend too much on the strangely doomed father-in-law. In addition, the man had not forgotten about Angela, and immediately after moving in, he invited her to his place. She turned out to be very nice, quickly got along with Catherine, and became her best friend. The strangest thing in this whole situation continued to be the friendship of Luke and the banker. They both considered the little girl their real granddaughter and looked after her, supporting the young family, barely accepting the thought of kinship with Alexander. Victor still didn't know how he should feel about Luca. The ex-con was a little intimidating, but on the whole he turned out to be a good man with a difficult fate. So, are you going to invite me to the wedding? Surgeon Alexander asked one evening. How do you know? Victor interrogated in amazement. I have eyes and ears all over town, smiled the banker. So it was you who helped with the adoption of the child. Alexander didn't answer, only stared benignly out the window, behind which leaves were raining gold. Thank you, Victor muttered quietly. We couldn't have done it so quickly on our own. Angela is pregnant, the banker clarified, smiling slyly. Sometimes I wonder how a whole year escaped your attention, sighed the surgeon. Call Frank godfather and it will be a pleasure. He has no children of his own, so Catherine and your youngest will be like a stone wall. I don't doubt it. Of course, that's what we wanted. We decided a long time ago because he helped us too. Come to the wedding, of course. We're a family. You're the only people we can invite. We don't need anyone else, Alexander smiled. The young people didn't know yet what lavish celebrations he had prepared for them as a surprise. What a modest feast in the apartment. The best restaurant in town was already in full swing preparing for the festivities. Grandpa, Catherine exclaimed cheerfully, running into the kitchen. Hello, my joy. Alexander smiled, picking up his granddaughter in his arms. Are you coming for a walk with us today? Or are you going to work again? The little girl asked. Enough. You've worked yourself up. It's time to be with your family in your old age. What's that pile of money for if you don't have anybody to spend it on? Watch out, you won't spoil me, Victor said emphatically. Don't worry. I don't make the same mistake twice. Alexander nodded back. At the voices came Angela. She smiled politely when she saw the banker, still a little shy, not knowing how the rich man would react to the fact that his daughter had been replaced by another after her death. But the man tried with all his might to show that everything was all right, as long as his granddaughter was happy. But Angela and Catherine didn't want each other's heart without that. It's good that you came. Let me give you some tea, she said. Thank you. My daughter is already taking care of the old man. Alexander smiled back, finally removing the tension. Victor sighed happily, looking at his family. After what they had been through, evenings like this seemed especially precious, filling life with an ineffable comfort and warmth. If you liked the story, I hope for your support with a thumbs up button. It's just one click for you, but it's extremely important to me. Thank you in advance and goodbye.